Hello, well it's Wednesday the 20th of June, winter solstice, the shortest day, so enjoy the shortest time at work you might be having for a working day in 2012. Not quite entirely sure it works that way, but hey, give it a whirl. Today I want to talk about a few things really. First of those is the voluntary bonding scheme that the government campaigned on back in 2008 and is now starting to pay some dividends for people that signed up to the scheme. So in its most simplistic form, if you are a doctor, nurse or midwife going through all the expenses that you obviously incur as part of getting your degree of qualification, what ends up happening if you want to sign up to the scheme and then go and work in a hard to staff area, then we'll pay off your student loan. So that's the relatively simple model. About 2,000 people have signed up to that scheme. The idea is to keep those skills in New Zealand and ultimately for that individual to benefit from that along with the community. And this week we started paying out to just under, I think, about 300 people who are getting their first payments through that scheme. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's very expensive to train our doctors and nurses and midwives, and we need them here working in New Zealand, so it's another incentive for them to stay. Just to give you a bit of perspective around that, if you go off to university and incur the costs of your course fees, around about 70% of that is actually paid by the state and 30% by the individual. Of that 30%, we'll lend that to you as a student loan for the most part, and we get back about half of that. So in whatever way you add up the numbers, around about 85% of the cost of going to universities is paid for by the taxpayer. So having that investment repaid, if you like, by those services being deployed in New Zealand, I think makes quite a lot of sense. So that's one of the policies that I think is working pretty well. Today we're also going through Parliament the mixed ownership model, so we go through what's called the committee stage. If you've never watched a bill going through Parliament, the way it works is it has its first reading, then typically it goes off to a select committee. That process might take, say, 6 to 9 months. The committee will take submissions from members of the public and experts who want to offer an opinion on the legislation. It very often will change. You'll get, as say, those experts feeding in, community views feeding in, and then the legislation comes back. It's what's called read a second time. Then you go through the committee stage, so part by part the legislation is debated in the parliamentary chamber. That's all voted on, and then you have a third reading. If it has a majority of the parliamentary support at the third reading, it then effectively goes from being a bill to an act when the Governor-General and I sign it into legislation. So that's the very abridged version of how you turn something into law. It's a little bit like sausages, you don't know completely how they're made, but that's the principle of the process, and we're going through the mixed ownership model at the moment. So a lot of things are not well understood, I think, around the mixed ownership model. The first of them is that the government is definitely retaining 51%. So we're the majority shareholder, and we actually give away some economic benefit, if you like, by doing that. So when people say, we're going to lose control of our assets, not true. The government will have the whip hand, and it's no different to the situation we have with Air New Zealand at the moment, where we own 73% and the private sector own 27%. The second thing is, people say, where you're selling our assets, it's also not true. We are selling a portion of some assets we currently own to buy other assets, and that's all about growing the economy and ensuring that we have assets that people need, which are different from the ones we've currently got. So in a way, it's a little bit like selling some small part of something you might own to go and buy something else. So overall, the balance sheet of New Zealand is growing. We're going to have more assets at the end of it. Third thing is to try and do that without having more debt. So of course, New Zealand could go and borrow that money, but again, you've got to pay that back with interest. Then you hear the story that we'll lose an awful lot on dividends. Fundamentally not really true. It's a bit of a wash between what we would pay to borrow the money or what we lose in terms of the dividend flow that we no longer get. So we still retain at least 51% of the dividends, but yes, some of those other dividends will go there. The argument is that dividends will go offshore. Fundamentally not true in the majority, so we anticipate the bulk of the shares will be owned by New Zealanders, about 90%, 85 to 90%. So yes, some small dividend flow might go offshore, but if we were borrowing the money, we almost certainly would borrow it all from offshore, so the interest payments would go to foreigners as opposed to dividends fundamentally going to New Zealanders. Then there's the advantage that it widens out the capital market, so gives you more of an opportunity to invest. And When we say you invest, you may buy those shares directly, you may buy them through a broker, you may buy them as part of your KiwiSaver account, or the state might buy them on your behalf through things like the ACC Fund or the New Zealand Super Fund. We're actually hoping that will build out the capital markets, so more companies will consider doing that. And a good example recently is Fairfax, that sold a stake of Trade Me that they own. They've got the majority control, but they've done exactly what we're doing in the mixed ownership model. You hear some talk that power prices will go up because it's the power companies that primarily are at the forefront of the mixed ownership model. Again, not true. If you go and have a look at under Labour, we owned 100% of those SOEs, which were the power companies. Power prices went up 72% in 9 years. Under National, they've gone up considerably less in the equivalent period of time. And in fact, I think it's PowerWatch is one of the websites that you can go and have a look at. And you can switch, if you like, between your provider. They give an analysis of who's cheaper. Of the 21 providers, the best 14, or in other words, the cheapest 14, are all privately owned. So there's no driver of power prices because of ownership. They come because of the cost of getting new generation. So in other words, what it costs these companies to bring a new power plant on stream. That's what drives the cost. And what's driving that is things like the RMA and other sort of regulatory burdens that these companies face. So overall, we think it's a good idea for New Zealand. We think it's something that New Zealanders will be able to participate in if they want to, and we think it will allow us to grow some other assets to develop more jobs and grow our economy. Like all these debates, there's often a lot of things said and not necessarily a lot of fact behind it. Most of the things that are said by opposition parties either aren't correct or done to mislead people, which I think is one of the reasons why the program's not well understood. But you know, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and so it's very important that when we have the first of these mixed ownership model companies coming to the market, which will be Mighty River, that we do a good job of that and obviously honour all the commitments we've made during the campaign. So that's that. All Blacks obviously play Ireland in the weekend, bit of a surprise down there in the cold conditions of Christchurch, but good to see Test rugby returning to Canterbury, and we'll see what the mighty All Blacks can produce in the Tron on Saturday night.